avocate, formée à l'Université de Tel Aviv et à Yale. Elle va nous parler donc de sa propre trajectoire. C'est un entretien personnel avec elle. Je lui ai demandé personnellement d'être là parce que moi, comme Montréalais, je m'intéresse à ce qu'une néo-montréalaise pense de Montréal, mais comment surtout elle se projette dans ma ville, dans sa ville, dans notre ville. Parce que pour moi, c'est ça, finalement, si on ne peut pas parler, si on ne parle qu'entre nous, entre Montréalais, on manque une partie importante, je pense, de ce que la trajectoire future de Montréal, c'est-à-dire la trajectoire des gens qui y sont depuis peu et qui se projettent dans le futur de Montréal. Donc, Claris.
Merci. No, I don't need that. So I'm very happy to be here, and I'm really sorry that I'm like talking in English. Living here makes me very conscious about me using the language, and I'm only using the English because, again, as I said before, my mind is totally indoctrinated in English, and it's amazing that for me, coming from the Orient, experiencing discrimination in my home country, using English has become my refuge, using an imperialist language in and of itself. So, je suis très heureuse d'être ici, Joël, and being here, I'll start with saying that speaking here is important for me for two reasons. First, because I'm actually speaking and I have a voice, and something that women that from my community don't have. We lack the visibility and voice. And secondly, it means, and it's interrelated and interconnected, it means that I'm entrenched myself in the life of Montreal. So I'm very proud. Thank you. So I'm going to start with a short poem. It's called 21 Love Poems, and it's written by Adrienne Rich. She was an American poet and a scholar, a queer theorist. Speaking of breaking and chaos. So she says this, and I think this short poem reflects my negotiation and my feelings about Montreal. So the rules break like a thermometer. Quicksilver spills across the chartered systems. We're out in a country that has no language, no laws. We're chasing the raven and the wren through gorges unexplored since dawn. Whatever we do together is pure invention. The maps they gave us were out of date by years. We're driving through the desert, wondering if the water will hold out. The hallucinations turn to simple villages. The music on the radio comes clear. But a woman's voice singing old songs with new words, with a quiet bass. A flute, plucked and fingered by women outside the law. So I think this short poem just reflects my flirting with my outsiderness and insiderness that Montreal represents for me. So when Joël approached me, he asked me, he said, imagine imaginary conversation between you and your, si je veux, future child, of explaining her why did you come here. And I thought that was a good advice, and this is what I had in mind when I wrote my short presentation. But I think what is preliminary, why I came here, the preliminary question would be why I would stay here. After experiencing mice and hospitals in my first 2 weeks. So why did I come here? The first immediate answer would be, okay, I came here to McGill to do my PhD. But I'm not that instrumental in my thinking, and I'm not that, in that sense that the reasons coming here are not that oversimplistic. In order to understand why I came here and why I would love to stay here, it's important to understand first who I am. And for a feminist like me, the personal always goes with the professional and the political. So I cannot really explain why I'm here without explaining where I come from. So geography. So I come from Israel, that tiny place that no one has heard of in the news. I come from Israel. I'm from a Mizrahi background. It means Jews who were brought to Israel, the official story would say, who immigrated to Israel. I say brought to Israel from Muslim or Arab countries. Before and after its establishment, Jews that have endured and still do deep discrimination, institutionalized discrimination by Ashkenazi Jews, Jews from Europe. On the same basis that, you know, the Eurocentric West invented its own other, right, the Orient. If I take Edward Said, so Ashkenazi Zionism had to invent its own particular other, and that was immediately translated into the us. We were and still perceived as primitive Jews, decadent, basically Arab Jews. That's why we're not as enlightened as European Jews. And what is mostly striking, and I think that will shortly will lead me to this notion of urban planning, that the main means, the main mechanisms by which Mizrahi Jews were discriminated by Ashkenazi Jews in Israel was through these notions of planning, architecture, and housing. Land and space are very important. I mean, I'm a lawyer and I write about power relations and about discrimination, and land and space are the main mechanisms by which settler societies, like this country, have entrenched their own power, not only on the space and the land physically, but on the people themselves and the space they carry or lack. So Mizrahi Jews were sent to distant parts of Israel, basically either in the north or in the south, creating what they called in Israel life shield. Basically, what they say is that to prevent the fedayun, right, the infiltrators, the Palestinians, from coming back to take their houses. So Mizrahis are a very complex concept in Israel. And it's a pity that she left, but the woman that was here, she talked about her hybridity or unreconciled hybridity between her French past and her Quebecer present, or vice versa. Mizrahis were, it reminds me of Du Bois. He wrote about unreconciled two-ness between being black and American. So Mizrahis were trapped between, if I can take Adrienne Rich compulsory heterosexuality, I will use a compulsory Israeliness. On one hand, we were included. You're good enough to be part of the enterprise, to come to Israel, but you're not good enough for enjoying the dividends of land, the dividends of monetary resources, the dividends of employment. So we were trapped between this extreme of Israeliness, compulsory Israeliness, and compulsory Mizrahiness, because back in Morocco, my parents were never Sepharad or Mizrahi, they were Jews. Marocains d'origine juive. This is how the king used to call them. So this unreconciled two-ness, I think, perhaps would be the best way to explain my engagement with this chaotic city. So I grew up, and I'm thinking out loud, so please, if I sound incoherent, I'm just, because I was still reflecting about what am I doing in Montreal, what am I doing here, and how to explain that to you as an immigrant. But I think that the important thing is that about my past, well, not my past, my origins as a Mizrahi Jew, being discriminated, ridiculed back in Israel, they have resulted in me growing up between always two extremes. Feeling permanent and temporal, being Jewish, feeling black. Ben Gurion, who was the first prime minister of Israel, they still call us that way, said that the Moroccan Jews will be served, to quote, like the Negro slaves who were brought to America. So immediately, you know, the notion of color, the notion of ethnicity has become very important in our presence in Israel. So being Jewish, feeling black, being Jewish, looking Arab, these are all contradictory feelings that I grew up with, and I think that have dictated why I became a lawyer at the end. I should have become a poet, but but I ended up using the word secretly. How much do I have, by the way?
I'll tell you.
Oh, but I might be just in the middle. So I, against all odds, and really despite the racism inflicted against us, I became a lawyer. And not only a lawyer, I became a human rights lawyer, which is also here in this country and in North America, in the world in general. To be a human rights lawyer, it means that necessarily you come from a privileged society, because only that can allow you to earn not much money in the first place. So not only going to law school, which was for me breaking the indoctrination where we've been locked, but also becoming a human rights lawyer and not a criminal lawyer. Usually Mizrahis become criminal lawyers because we do make good criminals. So these notions of contradictions reminded me of Descartes. And Descartes has this metaphor of the two cities. He has the metaphor of he talks about the old city, which is chaotic and perverse and dirty, and Sheila Ben Habib continues that and talks about the notion of knowledge. She says modern knowledge is not based on that chaotic city. Modern knowledge is based on the other metaphor, which he talks about the modern city, which is ordered, parceled, registered, clean. So these Mizrahi Jews were sent to these developing cities, that's how they called, where urban planners, civil engineers, and architects were basically the major mechanisms or the hands by which the Israelis could, the Ashkenazi Israelis could entrench their own power. So we're all locked into public houses, very small. The buildings in Israel are very typical, very gray, very ugly. Concrete and cement are very predominant. And I think this notion of chaos and order, how to tame and indoctrinate a minority into these small houses, made Montreal very, very interesting for me. I found a city which is very chaotic and very messy. I don't know, sometimes I walk around here and I don't understand, am I in Europe, am I in North America, am I in Boston, or even New York? I feel that it's very chaotic, and I think its sense of chaos has drawn me here, well, not to come here to McGill, but to stay here. And it has no pretense about its chaos. It's kind of like admitting forcefully, I'm chaotic. So I will just, because I jumped. It's the first city after a few years at Yale that allowed me to feel very comfortable about my Mizrahiness. I actually found people who listened, who understood what I was saying. People like Joël, who, a part of him basically not pronouncing the word Mizrahi right, trying to pronounce it right, people that understand, and I think also me relating, being discriminated, and also relating to the Francophone experience here in Quebec of discrimination, of feeling in the margins, and not being able for years to explore their own city. So Montreal has made me feel very comfortable and very safe. But I think, this is where it comes a bit interesting. It has accepted me, and it has accepted my chaos. I can walk around feeling chaotic in the street, and no policeman will arrest me for that. And this chaotic nomadism that I carry with me, I think, has found a place. If it sounds like an oxymoron. I told Joël yesterday on the phone, I found a home in my homelessness, I think. So I'm still homeless, but en français on dit sans abri, right? So now I'm taking away the song and I'm focusing on the abri. I found a shelter in this city. What's really interesting here, this notion of acceptance is very important for me. Back in Israel, we're excluded. So when I applied to the immigration, when I started my immigration process, this is where it started becoming really interesting. So I decided to apply for immigrant status through Quebec. I live in Quebec. I could have done that federally. Actually, it would have been faster, but I decided to do that through the Quebec process because I wanted to respect Quebec for preserving this power, symbolically anyway, to have the power on the immigration process. And they use the word selection in their process. So I was interviewed. I had a French interview, which was fascinating. Before the interview, everyone told me, you know, Claris, they will ask you questions about who's the Prime Minister of Quebec and where's the city and the capital. And I found it very, a bit insulting to tell me that because I didn't have to come to Quebec in order to know that. I knew that before. So I had to perhaps refresh my memory. It was like, so who's actually the Prime Minister now or then? But what was interesting for me was that, I mean, I took a French class in order to get into the immigration interview. Not instrumentally, and not because I wanted to be the best in the interview. It felt like I had to respect the interviewer and go to a French class, which in and of itself was very complicated and very, very challenging because I was surrounded by Anglophones who came to the class in order to get a language, very instrumentally in order to get a job. And for me, the language, I don't know what's being a Francophone, what does it mean? Is it only a language? But for me, speaking the language and speaking French, and ironically I speak in English while explaining that, for me speaking the language is cultural, is political. I'm using a language, in the interview we ended up talking about everything, you know. She never asked me a question about like political. I think she was too afraid to ask me that because she read that I'm engaged politically. So, but she at the end we were talking for an hour and a half, and then she shook my hand and she said, "Congratulations, en français, you're accepted to Quebec." I ended up crying in front of her, and she probably thought, oh, perhaps I shouldn't have told her that, or perhaps I should rethink it. I ended up crying because it was very strong for me to be accepted. I was born in a country where my parents were brought, and I never felt accepted. This notion of marginality and invisibility is very, very strong. I just came back from Israel yesterday, and it's amazing. I just crossed the line. I ended up in the States to change planes, and always I go there and I realize why I don't like to live there, and come back here. I suddenly felt visible in the airport, and at the airport, the guy at the customs, again, like she said, you're accepted, he said, welcome back home. So I ended up crying again, because nobody ever greeted me, welcome back home. But home here is very deep for me. It's not just a home because I live here. It's not circumstantial. It's deep for me. I actually feel I have a home in this homelessness. So she used the word acceptance, and she used the word selection. And selection, again, was very symbolic for me. We're always being, what would be the opposite of selection? Deselection, or never been selected. And suddenly I'm being selected by someone who tells me Quebec would be very happy to have you here. And here I am, coming from a country who was not very happy to have me there, for obvious reasons. But this word of selection, I think, leads me to another component of my identity, which adds to me flirting and dancing with Montreal. The selection is not only important for me as a Mizrahi, but it has the opposite negative connotation when it comes to be Jewish. Selection was always a process. It was called the selektia by the Nazis when they were, differentiate between the ones who are eligible to work and the ones who are eligible to die. So the word selection was very strong for me in that sense as well. And that leads me to what am I doing here as a Jew? So it's really interesting here, being a Jew in Montreal. On one hand, it's the first time ever I decided to wear the Star of David a year ago. I never had that before, not in Israel. Going back again to my component as a Mizrahi. Back in Israel, when you wear that, you're immediately tagged as a Mizrahi Jew, as a Sephardic Jew. Because Sephardic Jews were being indoctrinated to hate the Arabness inside us, so most of us are very right-wing, voting for Netanyahu. So wearing that has very nationalistic, connotation by enlightened European Jews, cynically. So I never thought of wearing that. And then here I come here, and suddenly I felt like I needed to, I don't know whether to say to be visible, but it felt for the first time comfortable to wear that without having any connotation, Zionist or whatsoever, but actually religious or spiritual. For me, reconnecting with years and years of heritage, and that's also goes back to my Mizrahi component. Back in Israel, Ashkenazi Jews wanted to found a state that is based on secularism and a force upon secularism, and I think this notion becomes very actual today with the question of whether should people here be allowed to wear the cross or not. Mizrahi Jews were relatively spiritual and traditional. So Ashkenazi Jews wanted to create a little Germany here, and they forced many of us, including my father and my grandparents, to become secular. So from cutting the payos, there were a lot of very atrocious mean means to create that. So for me, I think wearing that, it's a kind of, and here in Quebec, with this notion of the Catholic Church and la Révolution tranquille, wearing that is actually my way of protesting, saying I'm not agreeing with any force upon secularism upon me, and I'm not religious. So this is interesting that on one hand, Montreal has made me very comfortable about me being Jewish without the national aspects of it. Israel is a state, but my Judaism is older than it. So, but on the other hand, this is where it becomes complicated. I was walking in the street last year. I just came out from Marianne Faithfull's concert, and I was walking in the street, and Joël remembers that. And I was wearing my iPod, but still I am an Israeli, so we're always in control. It was to the point that I could actually listen to the street. So someone called me to my face, fucking dirty Jew. And I continued walking, and then I realized why he called me. And then when I turned to him, believe me, the only thing there was nothing that came out of my mouth that would have, gave the impression that I came from Yale, and I do a doctorate at McGill, because, you don't throw pearls on swine. But what shocked me is, I was heartbroken, obviously, that someone could ever say such a thing about someone else. But going back to this sense of homelessness, back in Israel, I'm a dirty Mizrahi, here I'm a dirty Jew, so where can I go? The moon? I might be a dirty Herdian there. So that was very hard for me, because up to that moment I found my place. This is where I can actually be. But that raised many questions with friends. Two friends of mine. One of them asked me, why do you think you were called dirty Jew? And I resented the question, because it implicitly implies that I did something to be called a dirty Jew, and you don't need to do anything, you just need to be Jew. And then he asked me, perhaps it was because of your Toile de David, and perhaps I should not wear that anymore. And then I told him, so perhaps you shouldn't be gay anymore. Because, you're telling me to take something out of my identity, and then, okay, I'll take that out, but he might hear me, I don't know, going to the synagogue one day, and he might call me a dirty Jew. It's not a problem to recognize me as a Jew, if they want. I don't have that big nose. And that was very complicated when I was asked by a friend of mine in the law school, again, perhaps I should take that out, and that I found it very interesting. We had a very long conversation. I told him, so would that be okay if I told him to tell his wife to take off the hijab while she's walking around the street of Montreal, because she might be, you know, confronting Islamophobia as well. So we're still friends. So I think that that in that sense, Montreal became a bit complicated for me and a bit hard for me, which leads me to the next complicated point about Montreal and about my identity, intersection of many identities, being a woman in this city. So it's really interesting. On one hand, I feel very safe here, being a woman. I can actually walk around 2 a.m. in the morning without feeling like I'm going to be raped, I'm going to be mugged. When I was in New Haven is a very paradoxical city. It hosts one of the best universities in the world, but it's one of the poorest cities in one of the richest states in the United States. And the city is, the university is also built, it's very interesting. So most universities in Israel are built, like Université de Montréal, they're built in high places or outside the city. University of Tel Aviv is relatively outside. University of Jerusalem is on the hill. You're thinking about the notion of power and how to access power, right? You need to make an effort to climb somewhere. So University Yale and the law school is actually built in the city, like McGill, which for me was interesting. But the fact that it's built in the city doesn't mean that it engages and converses with the city. Most of the schools at Yale are gated. The law school, for example, is built. It's really interesting. It has a court. It's built like I don't know how to say that in English, like a closed court. And it's thinking about the notion of knowledge and sharing, right? It's closed. We're not sharing. And just around the corner there is the ghetto. So at Yale, we were told don't rent a house those areas. We were told not to walk around after 6 o'clock because you might be mugged or you might be raped or you might be, you might meet a black person and he might be, I don't know, someone who could kill you. So I always felt afraid, not of being raped, but not God forbid being raped by a black person. I was always conscious about me in the city, kind of like. This is why I insisted on living in the ghetto itself, which was a big story in and of itself. But Yale was very segregating me and segregating vis-a-vis the city. And then I come to Montreal, and this is really interesting. I actually feel safe. I won't walk around, around parks 2 a.m. in the morning alone. McGill University, also refreshing, is located in the city itself, and the university is only part of the city. It's not the center of the world. There are actually other things, and there are other universities and much more intellectual conversation. So that made Montreal safer for me physically, but also intellectually. But at the same time, I don't know, we talked about that a lot. As a woman, I feel very invisible in this city. And I was laughing at my interview, actually. I said, je suis déjà une blonde, je suis pas trouvée by a chum. How do you say chum? Chum. So yeah, it feels very invisible. A lot of women, especially women I talk about with friends, women that are foreign to the city or foreign to Canada, foreign to Quebec, are talking about this sense of invisibility. And it's very complex. It raises a lot of questions of matriarchy and feminism in Quebec. And that's something that we can speak later. But being visible as a Jew, suddenly invisible as a woman, feeling very safe being visible as a Mizrahi for me, that makes me in Montreal very in a very interesting situation. Every time I speak of, I leave Montreal, it's the minute I leave Montreal, the minute I leave Quebec, it's the minute I actually start speaking French. And it's really weird. When I landed to this country, I thought, yeah, I'm in Quebec, of course I know French. I speak with my parents in French. This is the language we spoke at home. And I remember me trying to impress the custom officer, saying bonjour, and then he started speaking this foreign language that I did not know, and I did not understand. And something about the accent made me very, very conscious. But I have to understand that me and the French have very, like anything in my life, are very dialectic relationship. French, for my parents, was their way in Israel, their means to show Ashkenazi Jews. We're also, nous sommes Européens aussi. So we're good enough to be part of the enterprise. So me growing up, I resisted. I couldn't stand, at the beginning I couldn't stand listening to Arabic at home. They spoke only at home, not outside. They spoke French only outside, in the public sphere, not in the private sphere. So I was always, I was resisting the Arabic, and resisting the French. And on top of that, the French also later on, me, reading about colonization, obviously, French has very colonizing aspects in Morocco itself. So, and then I come here, and French becomes, it's so interesting, it becomes the language of the oppressed, of the colonized. So I feel comfortable speaking French with friends, but not outside. But then again, you end up in Trudeau, and you're surrounded by Quebecers who speak, you end up telling them why you speak English amongst yourselves, start speaking French. I was surrounded by all my Quebecer friends, and they all spoke in English, and it was only the Israeli from outside who reminded them they could actually speak French. So I think I will end by saying that Montreal, but it's hard for me to say only Montreal because I think it's interconnected to the notion of Quebec in general, has illuminated or has given me, perhaps had the opposite effect on the same things I was prevented as a kid and me growing up, which if I was feeling a sense of invisibility, still do in Israel, it's here that I'm visible. Also to the extent of being the dirty Jew, but at least I'm visible. Not mobile in Israel, and here I travel. I feel that I engage with the city. I'm mobile inside it. Sense of not having a voice and then coming here and having a voice. I think Montreal has allowed me to take all these things that I was prevented from or was categorized by, and and deconstruct that if I'm thinking about Derrida. So I hope I'll stay here. If Montreal, if she will want me to stay here, I think that going back to what you, about 3 words, I have 2 words about Montreal, and I'm a poet, so for me, the minute I start having comfortability with the language, it's the moment where I start playing with words. So, and I already shared that on my Facebook. I always say, je suis une Montréalaise. My mom says that I have a Quebecer accent. She was shocked. À l'aise. It means that je suis à l'aise à Montréal. And the other one, with that I will end, and I think this is what makes, the lady before used the word brise glace, icebreaker, and it's funny to say that about a place that is an ice maker. It's always glacé ici. But again, contradictions. It's so cold, and it's one of the warmest places on earth that I found, something that might be minus 38, but plus 38 in terms of like being hard. So the other word would be Montréal, c'est une ville d'hiver, but hiver would be written as in hiver, as in winter. So thank you.
Okay. I don't really want to add too much after that. I think that ends the day really well. Merci beaucoup, Claris. Je pense qu'effectivement, ça nous d'avoir un récit, une trajectoire pour clore la journée, c'est tout à fait approprié. Je vous remercie d'avoir été ici. Ça a été une assez longue journée, on a eu beaucoup de choses, mais ça a été très diversifié. Je suis très content des résultats, même si il a fait très beau, donc peut-être que moins de gens sont venus à l'intérieur. Il n'y a pas de fenêtre ici, peut-être aussi, ça n'a peut-être pas encouragé beaucoup de gens à venir, mais merci beaucoup d'avoir partagé ça avec nous, Claris. C'était vraiment très touchant. J'espère que tu auras la chance un jour de raconter à ta fille ou à ton fils. Donc, pour ceux qui sont vraiment demain, on se revoit demain, ça débute à 9h.
Oui.
Merci beaucoup d'avoir été ici. Bonne soirée.
Thank you.